In the police car, Jonathan Paul, dressed in a police uniform, leaned over and pinned me between him and his seat. "If you kiss me, you can consider what you said." I glanced at the handcuffs on my hand, and without hesitation, I took 2 mouthfuls of the handcuffs in his mouth. Due to the overwork, the crisp sound echoed in the car. After kissing me, I pursed my lips shyly, blushed and asked him, "Do you want more?" 1. The beginning of each month is the day I collect my protection money. I took my brother Abner, who grew up, to the commercial streets of the precinct and went door to door to collect money. I grew up in Sanda, so now I do a job that collects money and works hard, and it stands to reason that every penny I earn is clean. It's just that the stall owners prefer to add the word protection fee to this money, which is easy to say. I was taking the money from Toby, Abner, and I said, "Lauren Rusk, see that guy in a police uniform? Let's be a new police officer. Be careful." It said he's been in there several times, in the first 2 days he's been in office. I glanced at it, and that handsome face came into my eyes. Jonathan Paul. How could I not know him? I had a crush on him for 10 years. Just in a hurry, he grew in my heart, no matter what. In the past 10 years, I have inquired about him, and heard that he has been admitted to the police academy. I also got a picture of him in a police uniform, and his clean face tugged at my heartstrings, and made me unable to extricate myself. I looked straight at him, and I had more of a mature man than in the photo. "Count the money and leave. He seems to have noticed us." Abner's voice drew my gaze back. I quickly counted the money in my hand, and stuffed it into my pocket, pretending to be calm and ready to leave. As soon as I walked forward, a large hand grabbed my shoulder and pressed me in place, and I turned to meet his eyes. His gaze was still clear, but it looked at me with a slight coldness. He must have forgotten about me a long time ago, and that's no surprise. It's only half the same. Even if he remembered, his current status would not have anything to do with me. "What's the matter?" I calmed my nerves and asked him calmly. "I suspect you're suspected of extortion, so come with me." After that, the cold handcuffs were put on my wrists, and I was not allowed to excuse myself, so I was stuffed directly into the police car. The doors are closed and locked. I looked through the window and saw the stall owners crowding Jonathan Paul in the middle, and I vaguely heard words like, "She's a nice person. The weather in May is not hot, but you will still be out of breath if you are kept in a car without air conditioning." I sat in the passenger seat, reaching for the paper drawer on the workbench with my handcuffed hands, trying to wipe the sweat from my face. Strange to say, one hand is flexible, and when the 2 hands are together, it becomes clumsy. After enough for a long time, I didn't pull out a single piece of paper, but the paper pump was knocked to the ground in the driver's seat. I poked my entire upper body into the driver's seat to get the paper, and when I got it, I realized that I couldn't get up at all. My whole person formed an arch from the co-pilot to the driver's seat, and I couldn't go back, and it looked very funny. At this moment, the car door opened, and I saw a pair of slender and straight thighs. The legs were about to step in, but they seemed to hesitate when they saw my strange posture. He crouched down, the corners of his mouth curled upward, and looked at me with interest. I frantically avoided his gaze, embarrassed to death. He stared at me for a long time and finally reached out, and I was so happy that he was finally going to lift me up. Unexpectedly, he pulled a tissue from my hand, and began to wipe the sweat from my cheeks. I'm going crazy. I don't want to wipe my sweat now. I just want to get up. But looking at his serious face, I couldn't bear to interrupt him. I waited patiently for him to finish wiping, and he finally helped me up, and I politely replied, "Thank you." I thought about it, took out the 5,000 yuan I had just collected from my left pocket, and stuffed it into his hand. "Brother policeman, can you let me go? I really didn't make the mistake you said. They gave me the money voluntarily. Are you trying to bribe me?" He looked at the money in his hand and turned to me. I nodded and shook my head in fear. His hands hung in the air for a moment, then clenched, leaned over me, and imprisoned me between him and his seat. "If you kiss me, you can consider." "Okay." I didn't hesitate and took 2 sips at his mouth, and the crisp sound echoed in the car because I was trying too hard. After kissing me, I pursed my lips shyly, blushed and asked, "Do you want more?" He froze there, his ears reddening, and he fled from me. press the start button, slam on the accelerator, and the car jumps straight out. Why don't you talk without words? I asked him anxiously. He didn't answer me, and a palpable flush appeared on his face. I was so angry that I turned my head away from him. After a dirt road from the area to the city, the car swayed, and I fell asleep on the back of my chair. I slept soundly, and in my dream I dreamed that Jonathan Paul confessed to me with a gentle expression, and just as I nodded in agreement, a woman appeared, and Jonathan Paul turned around and left with the woman in his arms. Don't. I woke up from my dream. Jonathan Paul also seemed startled, and hurriedly removed his shoulder from the passenger seat. I looked at the wet patch on his shoulder, and wiped the corner of his mouth again. I realized that the car had stopped for a long time, and I had been leaning on his shoulder all along. Well, it's the place. He pulled out his car keys, and got out of the car, opened the passenger door, and uncuffed me. When I got out of the car, there was not a police station in front of me, but one of the hottest barbecue restaurants in the city. Before I could react, he had already walked in, and I trotted to catch up with him. We were welcomed very warmly by the owner. My girlfriend is so beautiful, the boss said while serving us utensils. I lowered my head and waited for Jonathan Paul's answer. Not a girlfriend, Jonathan Paul retorted coldly. My heart cooled down all of a sudden. 2. How can a person like me be worthy of him? Then he handed me the menu. Whatever you eat, whatever you want. I pushed back angrily. Everything. He didn't ask me again. He ordered it himself, and asked for a case of beer. I snorted in my heart. There are really not many people who dare to drink with me. After ordering, he leaned into the boss' ear and whispered something, and after speaking, the boss looked at me and showed a sly smile, and whispered a few words to him, and left. The food came up quickly, and we ate and drank beer. After 3 rounds of drinking, our conversation gradually intensified, and I told him about the new people and things I had seen over the years, and he told me about the curriculum, training and interesting facts of the police academy. Soon, a case of wine was over, and we all felt that it was not good enough, so we ordered another case. After a few more bottles, I could visibly feel my head spinning, but he was still sitting across from me, with his face unchanged. Gradually, my eyelids became heavier and heavier, the sound in my ears became quieter and quieter, and the people around me, and the tables and chairs were spinning. When I woke up again, Jonathan Paul and I were in the same bed, and he was sleeping peacefully, breathing shallow, evenly. I lifted the quilt gently, and the blinding red on the sheets woke me up instantly. Oh my God, how did I sleep with him? I pounded my head hard, frantically piecing together fragments of yesterday's memories. I can't remember how I ended up in bed. It's a big deal. Am I attacking the police? Frightened, I tiptoed out of bed and kicked on my pants haphazardly. When he wakes up, he won't have to arrest me and take me back to the police station. And now I seem to have another charge. Alas, how can I be drunk and immoral? I really want to cry without tears. Forget it. 36 plans. Run for the upper plan. With my shoes in one hand and my coat in the other, I walked to the door with bated breath. As soon as he arrived at the door, a low and mellow voice sounded behind him. Lauren Rusk. I stopped, closed my eyes, and the cold sweat on my back drenched my thin shirt. Hey. I turned slowly. You say, do you want to run after you sleep? He frowned, his eyes as sharp as blades, and he looked at me fiercely. I've seen the world, and I don't blink when the tip of the knife is in front of my eyes when I fight, but I'm afraid of him. This may be the legendary, one thing descends one thing. I didn't. I'm just afraid I'll disturb your rest here. Don't be afraid. I'm already bothering. He lowered his eyes and picked up a cigarette. Come back. Sit here. I didn't dare to resist, so I put on my shoes, and sat down in the position he gestured to. He lit a cigarette and smoked clouds and smoke beside me, and I was not idle, my mind racing to think of a plan. Pregnant. I sat up straight, and began to organize the language, mentally cheering myself up over and over again. No matter what I said about this last night, I was a girl, but as long as you let me go, I will rot the matter in my stomach forever, and I will never let the third person know. After I finished speaking, I glanced over with my peripheral eyes, and saw that my frowning brow was a little stretched, and I seemed to be smiling. but I really turned my head to look at it and didn't smile. Are you threatening me? Not exactly. We call it win-win cooperation. He sat upright, and his tone became extremely cold. Do you know what happens when you talk about win-win cooperation with a people's policeman? I didn't say anything for a long time, and I admit that his powerful aura shook me. Then he took out his phone, slid it twice, and handed it to me. It's me and his video. In the video, I took the initiative to wrap my arms around his neck, kiss him, and put my hand in his shirt. The video stopped, and my mouth opened wide. This is only part of the story. Do you need to read on? He leaned over, close to my ear, afraid that I could touch his soft lips with a slight movement. I shifted and tried to keep my distance from him. You're perverted. Why are you still making videos? I'm protecting myself reasonably. Otherwise I'll be forced to cooperate with someone for a win-win situation. His words sounded sarcastic. Jonathan Paul, count yourself in on it. I folded my hands and looked at him beggingly. I was wrong. Okay, don't arrest me. I have an old and a young. Small. His eyes suddenly dilated. Cat. I elongated my voice. He pinched the cigarette in his hand and chuckled wickedly. You can let it go. But, you say, I can promise you anything. He was silent for a while. Forget it. I didn't think about it. Let's owe it first, and I'll tell you when I think about it. Okay, don't worry. Lauren Rusk. I rely on the word, letter, on the rivers and lakes. And you can come to me at any time when you need it. I patted my chest and said. As soon as he finished speaking, he slapped me on the head. How can I look like a woman? Hurt. Is he smacking me? Yesterday, he was able to shoot a video soberly but didn't push me away. I really don't know what kind of heart he has. Forget it. I also took a big advantage when I slept with him. But yesterday the fragment was serious, and I can't remember the details at all. It's a pity. I shook my head and smacked my lips. He lifted the quilt and got up, quickly put on his police uniform, and looked in the mirror and straightened his police hat. I watched his strong chest, strong arms, and narrow waist and abdomen and swallowed. Where is this man? This is simply a god descending from the earth. But it is not sent to save me, but sent to torture me. I slapped my burnt face a few times in an attempt to calm myself down. Hey, haven't you seen enough? I've seen enough. I'm going to work. Jonathan Paul's words woke me up, and I realized that he seemed to have been staring at me for a long time. My heart was beating so violently that I was speechless. Grabbed my coat and ran out of the house. When I was about to get to the door, I looked at my grandmother, who was standing on tiptoe and staring. I didn't come home overnight. She must have been in a hurry. I hurriedly trotted over and helped my grandmother into the house. Lauren Rusk, where have you been? And how did you come back? There was anger in Grandma's concerned tone. Yesterday I went out with Abner to catch fish. It was too late. It was not safe to drive at night, so I found a random hotel nearby to stay. I'm sorry, Grandma. I worried you. Grandma tapped my head with her hand. You just have a playful mind, fooling around with that Abner every day. Whose good boy like you dares to marry you? If you don't marry, you won't marry. I don't want to marry yet. I just want to live with my grandmother for the rest of my life. Saying that, I nestled into my grandmother's arms, and put my arms around her neck in coquettish. Lauren Rusk, I was just about to discuss with you. You sit down. Grandma pushed me away. I know my body. It can't be cured. Grandma doesn't want to cure it. I don't want to drag you down anymore. It's not always a way for you to collect protection money and be a thug for others. You can find a job safely, so that you can find a good man to marry and have children. Grandma, I interrupted. Why can't it be cured? The doctors say that you are much tougher than before. Besides, what I am doing now is what I love. They give me money. I protect them. We fulfill each other. Don't think so much. Just heal well. Grandma looked at me for a moment and sighed. I held her hand and comforted her. Grandma, you have to live well. I have a home with you. Okay. Grandma nodded at me. I settled my grandmother and remembered that Jonathan Paul had taken me away yesterday and had only collected half of the protection money. So I hurried out and headed out for the street. When I got to the street, I saw that Emona's vegetables were thrown everywhere, and the glass of Toby's shop was smashed. So I continued to walk forward, and the other shops were not spared. I hastened to ask what was going on, Everyone ran over to me when they saw me come back, and squeezed me in the middle. Lauren Rusk, you're back. Did the cop do anything to you? That policeman looks very good. We pleaded with him to let you go, and he seemed to agree. Why did he still pull you away? Yes, we all said that we volunteered to give you money to protect our. I looked at Evrion's concerned eyes, and my eyes were a little moist, and I hurriedly raised my head, and put my tears back. I'm fine. I just simply took a transcript. Don't worry. That's it. What's going on? I pointed to the vegetables and fruits all over the place. Rodney came and said you were all in, and he would charge us for the protection of this piece in the future, and we wouldn't give it, so we would. Emona said. What? I rolled up my sleeves, turned around and picked up the iron rod standing aside. Whoever dares to touch me, I'm going to beat him up today until he doesn't even know his mother. I was about to leave, but Toby grabbed me. Lauren Rusk. Rodney has been organizing a dozen younger brothers lately. There are so many people. You don't have to be their opponent. Hey, aren't there just a dozen people? Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. No, I'll call a few. So saying that I called Abner, and soon he came running with 5 or 6 brothers, and I was just about to praise him, but when I looked closely, all of them were as thin as weak chickens, and I wished that they would be swept away by a strong wind. Forget it. What else to pick in this situation now? Let's take a strong scene first. I took these elite soldiers to Rodney's stronghold, a small smoke-shrouded shop. I stood in the doorway and shouted, Rodney, you're Lauren Rusk. Get out of here and get on your knees. Who? Rodney slowly walked out of it with a cigarette in his mouth. I'm going to let you out so soon. What's the matter? Did you change your mind and agree to marry me? I'll marry your mother. I couldn't see his greasy face, and the dirty words ran out of his mouth unconsciously. Rodney stepped forward and pinched my chin. What a beautiful little girl. Why are you still scolding? I lifted my leg and kicked him hard in the crotch, and he let out an oops in pain and rolled on the ground. At this moment, several strong men came out of the house, bent down to help Rodney on the ground. Rodney glanced at them. They shouted, and 7 or 8 people came out of the room. I took 2 steps back and whispered to Abner, you take these guys back. Don't splash your blood in a moment. All right, Lauren Rusk. This is the tacit understanding that the two of us have formed over the years. He never inks when fighting, and he retreats faster than anyone else. I yelled, withdraw. They ran away quickly, and then a dozen strong men surrounded me, and I raised the iron rod to the front wheel, and when I was about to fight, a figure flashed over, and the stick smashed impartially on his shoulder. Jonathan Paul. I was stupid and immediately threw the stick on the ground. Police. Jonathan Paul swallowed the pain and showed Rodney his police badge. Rodney and the others immediately put away their fierce expressions, and obediently stood in a row. What for? Jonathan Paul asked. Somehow, I would stumble at the sight of him, especially in the face of his righteous and awe-inspiring face. I didn't ask you. He glared at me and looked at Rodney. Rodney was busy smiling. His hard-working face was full of folds. Comrade policeman, we didn't do anything. We chattered. This is my friend. I will bring my brothers to get to know each other. He pointed his finger at me as he spoke. Don't, Rodney. I tried to retort, but Rodney raised his voice and drowned out my voice. Lauren Rusk, don't be angry. Let's talk about it privately. Now that the police are here, don't you let people see the joke? Rodney, your mouth again. I glared at him, so angry that I couldn't speak, and scolded him 10,000 times in my heart. Lauren Rusk, you can do it. Jonathan Paul looked at me through gritted teeth. No, you listen to me. After saying that, I felt that something was wrong. Why should I explain it to him? Before I could figure it out, Jonathan Paul pulled me to him, handcuffed me, and turned to them. Be honest. Let me see it again, and you'll end up like her. No. What is the same as me? Why only arrest me? Like yesterday, I was stuffed into a police car by Jonathan Paul, and pulled away without a word. I was so angry that I shook my handcuffed hands vigorously and looked at him angrily. Jonathan Paul, are you sick? Do you have no place to use your handcuffs? He didn't respond to me, and after a while, pulled over to the side of the road, leaned over and imprisoned me in the seat. How do you know my name? I saw your police ID in the morning. He lowered a strange look in his eyes. I let out a long breath, secretly regretting that I had almost missed my mouth. Luckily, it came back smoothly. He turned around, took out a cigarette, clamped it to his slender finger, and for a moment, lit it. He took the butt of the cigarette in his mouth, and inhaled it violently, exhaling a beautiful wisp of white smoke. I was a little envious of this cigarette, and even more greedy for the smell of tobacco in his mouth. He saw that I had been staring at him, and handed the cigarette in his hand to my lips. Want to smoke? I plucked up the courage to take a big puff forward, and in an instant the smoke filled my mouth, and I swallowed down in a panic, and some swallowed and some ran out of my nose. The swallowed part swept through my throat, and it was so hot that I burst into tears and coughed dryly. I hurriedly turned to the side, afraid that he would see me funny. When I turned around, he handed over 2 pieces of paper, and there seemed to be concern in his eyes. What can I not do? It's not that I can. I just don't want to miss the opportunity to kiss him indirectly. I kept my head down, clenched my fingers, and didn't dare to speak. In the middle of the night, it was very quiet in the car, and I looked up, and my lips were just brushed against his. Oh my God, when did he get so close to me again? I subconsciously dodged. He put his hand around the back of my head and pressed my head, and kissed me deeply and shallowly. I was stunned, only to feel a tingling all over my body. I looked at his clean face, and my heart throbbed, and the boy I was thinking about was actually kissing me. Close your eyes. He stopped and spoke to me in a commanding tone. I obediently closed my eyes, and he kissed him again, this time more passionately. When I was about to lose my breath, he stopped and looked at me affectionately. Lauren Rusk, don't lie to me in the future. I don't. I always keep my police card in the car, and never take it home. Yes, I was struggling to explain, but he leaned into my ear. You haven't changed at all, just like you did 10 years ago. Does he remember me? He brought his lips closer to me again, and I subconsciously closed my eyes, and for a moment, there was nothing abnormal on my lips, but my neck felt a warmth. He's kissing my scars. I shook my body, put my hands on his chest, and a faint murmur sounded in my ears. How much have you suffered over the years? My brain exploded, and I pushed him away in a panic, tugging up on the collar to cover the scar. He didn't take precautions, and I pushed him back into his seat, his back leaning back against it. I remembered that he had a shoulder injury. I stepped forward and unbuttoned his collar, eager to check on his injuries. He was stunned for a moment, but did not resist. The clothes were opened, and the entire shoulder was bruised, oozing red blood. Can you still drive? Go to Huimin Lane. I'll give you medicine. I was very distressed, and there was urgency in my tone. He let out a and got up and drove in the direction of Huimin Lane. When I got home, my grandmother fell asleep and I took him to my bedroom. I helped him take off his police jacket and light blue shirt, and saw that his left shoulder was high and swollen. I quickly took out the medicine box, and gave him the medicine, but the pain was unbearable, and his body trembled slightly. It hurts. I'll take it lightly. I looked at the beads of sweat on his forehead, and my heart ached like a pinprick. He shook his head. It doesn't hurt. After getting the medicine, I helped him get dressed and said, don't worry, this is my special medicine, and the swelling will go down tomorrow. He got up and looked around. Are you going to live here? Alone? No. And Grandma? What about your parents? He looked at me with concern. Yes, I used to have a happy family, and lived a carefree life every day, never worrying about money, but the good times didn't last long. And when I was 14 years old, fate played a big joke on me. My father's company went bankrupt and committed suicide by jumping into the sea, and my mother couldn't afford to get sick, and it didn't take long for her to. My tears were rolling uncontrollably in my eyes, and I habitually looked up to not let the tears fall. I'm sorry, Lauren Rusk. I shouldn't have asked. Jonathan Paul came over and took me in his arms, rubbing my head with his fingertips. It's all over. Cry if you want to. I'm here. I buried my head in his abdomen. There was no smell of sweat on his body, only a faint fragrance of laundry detergent. His gentle voice broke through my last line of defense. and the grievances I had endured for many years broke out at this moment. Crying silently, I gradually calmed down, and there was movement in my grandmother's house, so I quickly wiped the tears from my face, and pushed him away. Grandma came out of the house. "Grandma, you're awake." I greeted her and helped her to a chair and sat down. When my grandmother saw Jonathan Paul standing next to her, she panicked, clasped my hand tightly, and whispered, "Lauren Rusk, are you in trouble again? Why did the police find our house?" I followed my grandmother's gaze and glanced at Jonathan Paul, a smile on his lips, nodded to my grandmother, and then looked at me. I hurriedly avoided his tender eyes, lowered my head and explained to my grandmother, "Grandma, he's my friend." Grandma's expression turned from cloudy to sunny. "Friends, hello friends." Grandma got up. "Then you guys, Grandma, go cut some fruit." "No, Grandma, he's leaving." Saying that, I pushed Jonathan Paul out, and he was still a little reluctant, and kept looking back at his grandmother, and finally he couldn't resist. So he turned around and said pitifully, "Goodbye Grandma." When we got to the door, Jonathan Paul stopped, turned around and hugged me. I didn't dare to resist, obediently pressed my head on his stiff chest. "Jonathan Paul." "Hey," he responded gently, "why didn't you take me to the police station? How can I be willing to?" He tightened the hand holding me. "Will the police department punish you?" I interrupted him anxiously. "No, the above are more familiar with the situation in the area, and your situation can be dealt with specially." "That's good." I put my mind at ease and rubbed against his chest, his arms so warm. He burst out laughing, and I looked up at him, his eyes narrowing into a slit. "Do you particularly want to know the conversation I had with my boss at the barbecue restaurant that day?" "Yes." "How do you know?" I looked at him in amazement. He whispered in my ear in a deep, magnetic voice, "I said you're not my girlfriend, but I'm chasing you, and my boss compliments you on how beautiful you are, so I have to work harder." It dawned on me why my boss looked back at me and smiled. I shy curled up in his arms, and for a moment I summoned up a great deal of courage and asked, "Jonathan Paul, do you like me?" The phone ringtone interrupted his words. He glanced at the screen, let go of the hand holding me, and walked to the side to pick up the phone. I stood there and looked at him, recalling what had happened in the past 2 days, as unreal as a dream. He made a long phone call, then walked up to me, his expression seemingly changing subtly. "Lauren Rusk, I've left beforehand. Let's not contact each other again." What? I couldn't believe my ears. He glanced at his phone. "The person I like is back looking for me." So he just went to answer her call. I tugged at the corners of my clothes helplessly, looking at his cold and determined eyes, and my heart broke little by little. Those 2 days, and that night, it's just lonely. I'm also human, and I thought she wouldn't come back. So I thought of you. I slapped it over, and the crisp sound echoed through the street, red fingerprints appearing on his delicate skin. He clenched his fists, didn't speak, and turned to leave. I looked at the back of him leaving, and my floating heart sank. I should have recognized the reality a long time ago. He was so good. How could he belong to someone like me? I cleaned up my mood, and went back to the house, and after a few simple words with my grandmother, I locked myself in the room. I put my head under the covers, tears streaming down my face, and my heart ached like it was cracking. I lay in a daze, fell asleep when I was tired of crying, and continued to cry when I woke up. After 3 days, I got up with my eyes swollen like walnuts to eat a mouthful, then turned around and went back to bed. Just as I was falling asleep, I heard someone call me. It was a man's voice. I sat up jerkily, and opened my eyes, only to see Abner standing at the end of the bed. I sighed in disappointment and went back to lying down. "Lauren Rusk, stop sleeping. Rodney is making trouble for us again." "What?" I got up and started getting dressed. "Threatens to see you, and if you don't show up for an hour, he will smash a shop." "Is his skin itching again?" I followed Abner out the door and into his van. "Lauren Rusk, why don't we notify the police?" "Detective, don't." I rejected him categorically. "Lauren Rusk, have you heard? We're changing the police. Isn't that the new Jonathan Paul?" "I know," I replied to him impatiently. "It's not him. It's a new one. It turns out that he was fired from the police department." "What?" I was shocked, and my heart beat faster. I heard that he told his girlfriend the news of the secret operation of the police station, and the news leaked out, so that an important arrest by the police department came to naught. How could he make such a low-level mistake? It seems that he really loves her and trusts her. That's good. It's good to be loved by him. And I even envy his girlfriend a little bit, who can enjoy his love unscrupulously. Lauren Rusk. What did you say? I said it's good that he's been expelled, and that people in the province always come to trouble me. After saying that, I turned my head to look out the window. It was very windy. I rolled down the window. A grain of sand got into my eyes, and I cried in pain. Lauren Rusk. Here, Abner called me. I came to my senses, wiped away my tears, and got out of the car to see Rodney swinging a stick and smashing the shop. I ran over and kicked him forward, bent down and put my hand on his head and said, Rodney, your mother is here. What do you say you're looking for me? Rodney was surprisingly unusual. Not only did he not get angry, but he begged for mercy with a smile. Lauren Rusk. Don't make a fuss. Let go of your hand. I've come to you today for something important. I listened to him, and half convinced my hand let go, and he struggled to get up from the ground. Tell me, what's the matter? I asked him. He took an envelope and handed it to me. I opened it. It was empty. I was tricked. As soon as I reacted, I felt a sharp pain in my head, and I lost consciousness in an instant. When I woke up, I was lying in a dim, damp room, lit by a candle in the dark space. I endured the sharp pain in my head, and looked around the room. There was only a small door, and I pushed it but didn't push it open. Rodney, you wait for the old lady, and I will peel your skin when you go out. I clenched my fists and didn't get angry. The door opened, and Rodney came in with two strong men. I rushed straight up, and tried to knock Rodney down, but the two strong men reacted quickly, one left and one right, and I couldn't compete with them because of the wound on my head. Rodney looked at me with a hideous expression, and a grim smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Lauren Rusk, you continue to be arrogant. Now you are in the master's territory. If you want to live, you have to listen to the master. What Rodney can't get, must be destroyed. Bah, Rodney, you play with my mother. You let go of my mother. Believe it or not, you can't beat me with a hole in my head. I struggled forward, nearly poking Rodney's greasy face a few times. At this time, Rodney's younger brother came in and said something in Rodney's ear, and Rodney turned and went out. In the middle of the night, Rodney approached as he spoke. Faintly I heard the words, found, test, and goods, and as the voices got closer, I heard a complete conversation. Second brother, don't worry, there is only an old man in her family besides her, and that old man is sick all day long, and he can't make any waves when he knows that she is missing. The man replied softly. Then Rodney and the man entered the house. I looked up and saw through the dim candlelight. The silhouette was so familiar. The man looked up, and I met his eyes, and it was Jonathan Paul. Looking closely, there is a faint layer of stubble on his chin, and the whole person has undergone a lot of vicissitudes. Tears flowed down the sides of my eyes, whimpering and speechless. A mixed emotion flashed through his eyes, and he avoided my gaze and looked away. Second brother, do you think she's okay? Will you just take it with you, or will I send it to the base for you? Take it away, Jonathan Paul said. Okay, I'll tie it up for you. This Nietzsche is very irritable. You have to be careful. You don't need to tie it up. Just send me to the car. That, Rodney hesitated, but still stopped what he was doing. Listen to your second brother. Anyway, you are good at kung fu, and it will definitely be no problem to deal with her. As soon as I finished speaking, I was pushed outside. The darkness inside made it difficult for me to adjust to the harsh sunlight, and I squinted forward, only to notice the black Bentley. I was shoved roughly, leaning limply against the back of my chair, my head aching, and my forehead began to sweat incessantly. Jonathan Paul came in, sat down next to me, and the car started to start. He didn't say anything, lit a cigarette, took a sharp puff and exhaled a wisp of white mist. I looked at it, and his side face was still so good-looking that made me heart beat again. I thought that I would scold him when I saw him again, but now I can't even hate him, and even feel that he is a little pitiful. How are you doing? I looked at him, trying to pull a smile at the corner of my mouth. His hand holding the cigarette shuddered, and he squeezed out an at the corner of his mouth. Also, I asked, a little redundant, looking at his current clothes and car. None of them looked like he was having a bad time. The car drove for a long time, and stopped in an area of abandoned residential buildings. He took me out of the car, and told the driver to wait here. I followed him upstairs, and when I got upstairs, he sat me on the couch, took out the medicine box, gently brushed my hair, and helped me apply the potion. I closed my eyes and endured the sharp pain, grabbed a piece of cloth in my hand, and held it tightly, controlling myself not to scream. After a few moments, he stopped what he was doing, and my head didn't hurt so much. I opened my eyes and saw that it was his trouser leg that I was crumbling in. I'm sorry to crumple your pants. It's okay. His voice is still as good as that. Jonathan Paul, what are you doing now? Why do they call you second brother? I couldn't help but ask. Don't ask. You shouldn't know. His indifference poured down on me like a basin of cold water, and my heart was cold. I looked at the man in front of me. He was no longer the Jonathan Paul the first loved. I stood up, gave him a disappointed look, and walked towards the bedroom. And after a while, he pushed the door in. There's food in the fridge. You stay here for 3 days, and when you recover from your injuries, I'll arrange for you to leave. Arrange for me to leave? Where are you going? I asked him. Go home. You leave the city with your grandmother. What about you? If you let me go, will they let you go? Although I only heard a few words in Rodney's mouth, I knew in my heart that I was unlucky. Listen to me. I'll take care of it. He took my shoulder, his eyes softened, and he turned to leave. I couldn't resist rushing over and grabbed him from behind. He froze for a moment and tried to take my hand away, but I wrapped it tightly around his waist and refused to let go. But he saw that he couldn't help me, and gave up the struggle and let me hold it. Are you hiding something from me? Please tell me that you have a hard time, don't you? I asked him in a crying tone, almost shouting. After a while, he sighed. No, don't ask. I let go of my hand, and walked up to him, and saw 2 tears streaming from the corners of his eyes. He saw me come over and scramble to wipe it off. Jonathan Paul, you look me in the eye and tell me, did you ever like me? Even for a moment, the corners of his mouth twitched, and he didn't answer my question. So he was in a stalemate for a long time. His back gradually bent down, and he pulled me into his arms, his voice trembling. Lauren Rusk, when I get out of here, we'll get married. Okay. I wrapped my arms around his waist again, tears streaming uncontrollably. Okay, I'll wait for you. He gently cupped my face, looked at me affectionately, leaned over, kissed my eyelashes, and then took my tears in his mouth. I closed my eyes, and his kiss moved down, on the tip of my nose, and then down, and he wrapped around my lips, sucking, exploring, and then filling my entire mouth. In this moment, I enjoyed his love, his promises, his kisses unbridledly. Just as I was responding to him, his phone rang. He stopped, picked it up, and I saw that the caller ID on the screen was Elva, which was probably the woman who had made her jobless. He picked up the phone, said yes and hung up. I wanted to ask, but I didn't. I thought I should believe him unconditionally. He must be in some kind of trouble now. He came over, gently took me in his arms, and whispered in his ear, trust me, I only love you. These 7 words weigh more than 1,000 words, and I weep with joy. He gently wiped tears from my face, and then told me that he would be waiting below to meet me when I climbed down the window 3 nights later. I nodded in agreement. He left. I heard the sound of the door locking. I looked down the window. He said a few words to the driver and drove away, and the driver walked into the hallway. I walked to the door, and through the cat's eye, the man was sitting on the floor, and it looked like he was sent to watch me, and was afraid that I would escape. 3 days passed quickly. The room was well stocked with medicine and food, and my injuries were almost recovered. As it got dark, I took out the rope I had screwed in advance with a sheet, tied one end to a firmer place, and placed the other end in front of the window. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall seemed to count down my escape, and my heart beat faster with nervousness, and a thin layer of sweat broke out in my palms. Finally, the hour and minute hands point to 12 at the same time. I threw the rope down and looked down. and it was so dark that I couldn't see the end of the rope at the height of the 3-story building. I climbed out of the rope as I had a sand base, so climbing the rope was a breeze for me, and soon I was climbing to the second window. I took a breath and was about to climb down when I heard someone open the door upstairs, and it was someone from the hallway who came in. I was so frightened that I sped up and climbed down, and suddenly I didn't feel right. The rope under my feet was gone, and I still had a floor to go. If you jump directly, you will fall and be injured, and you will. But if I'm here, the people upstairs will immediately find out that I'm here, and it's only going to be more dangerous. I thought about it for 2 seconds and decided to jump. I bent my legs up and made a favorable drop position. When I let go of my hand, I instantly lost my center of gravity and my posture became messy. Suddenly, I felt a shock in my body, and there seemed to be no pain in tearing, and I opened my eyes, and it was Jonathan Paul, who caught me with his hand. Jonathan Paul. I put my arms around his neck and buried my head in his collarbone. You're here. I thought I'd never see you again. He looked at me, his eyebrows full of tenderness. I'm sorry, I'm late. Soon. He picked me up in the car and drove away quickly. I looked behind me and a man ran out of the hallway, making a phone call looking in the direction we were leaving. Jonathan Paul. Where are we going? I asked him. Railway station. You and Grandma go to Jinan. I have everything arranged over there. What about you? I looked at him worriedly. I'll settle this side and go over. You wait for me. With that, he reached over and rubbed my head. Really? I watched in the dark as my eyebrows almost twisted together, and I guessed he was lying to me. He was about to speak, when suddenly a car crossed in front of him, and Jonathan Paul slammed on the brakes before we came to a safe stop. The car door opened, and a middle-aged man and a charming woman got out, and then 2 more cars stopped, and 10 strong men in black got out of the car. Jonathan Paul unbuckled his seatbelt and I grabbed Jonathan Paul's arm to get out of here. Jonathan Paul, let's reverse and go. I say. He took my hand and looked at me and said, I'll go down. You lock the car door. Don't open the door if I don't come back. I didn't know how to refuse, but he said yes and got out of the car. I quickly locked the door from the inside. Jonathan Paul went down to talk to the middle-aged man, and the man tapped him on the shoulder, as if with a smile, and I relaxed, thinking it was just a simple pleasantry. Suddenly, the middle-aged man kicked Jonathan Paul to the ground. The strong men surrounded him and dragged Jonathan Paul up from the ground, and the middle-aged man continued to beat him, and I quickly opened the car door and rushed down. I kicked the middle-aged man away and hugged Jonathan Paul, who was startled and pushed me out. Go back to the car, quick. I don't want to. I want to be with you. I hugged him tightly, and this time he didn't push me away, stroked my face, and smiled at me with the corners of his lips very reluctantly. I'm sorry, Lauren Rusk. It's me who is not good. I am trouble. I stood on tiptoe and kissed him on the lips, not wanting him to say more. As long as we are together, I am happy, and I am happy in death. Quick, pull them away. A woman's voice came from behind me, and Jonathan Paul and I were quickly separated. The delicate woman stomped her feet, tears streaming down her face. Jonathan Paul, don't you say you just pity her? You tell me, what is your relationship? I looked at the woman and guessed that she was the Elva in Jonathan Paul's phone. Jonathan Paul looked at her without speaking. The woman was so angry that she walked up to Jonathan Paul and slapped him hard. You lied to me. The person you love the most is her. Right. So you never said you loved me. In vain. I was so good to you. My eldest brother was so good to you. The woman's slap exerted all the force, and red blood oozed from the corners of Jonathan Paul's mouth. Jonathan Paul smiled at the corners of his mouth, as if mocking and unwilling. Take them away. The middle-aged man angrily dropped a sentence, and took the woman into the car. Jonathan Paul and I were stuffed into the car, and the car drove to a village I had never been to. The doors opened, and the strong man dragged us to the bungalow, tying our hands and feet. The middle-aged man took out 2 syringes from the back room, looked at me, and then at Jonathan Paul. Don't you feel sorry for her? Then you can try it with her. It just so happens that you are strong, and you also meet this condition. I looked at the white, cloudy liquid inside the syringe. My heart tightened, and I subconsciously looked at Jonathan Paul. What is this? Jonathan Paul whispered 2 words from the corners of his mouth, drugs. What? My fears were magnified infinitely, and I struggled, but nothing helped. The corners of the middle-aged man's mouth curled with contempt. You're not entirely right. It's not called a drug yet, and you can only call it a drug after you have tested it. You beast! I shouted at him. The charming woman stepped forward, with tears in her eyes. Big brother, this one will become vegetative if it doesn't work. Or we just let this woman try. Don't let Jonathan Paul try. Okay. The man glared at her fiercely, and cursed in a low voice. Elva, you're still interceding for him. All he tells you is a lie. As I said, no one who deceives us will end well. As he spoke, he grabbed Jonathan Paul's arm and plunged it into it, and fine beads of sweat instantly appeared on Jonathan Paul's forehead, and he clenched his teeth in pain. In addition to my screams, there was also the sound of the woman crying, Jonathan Paul. I just called out his name, and then I lost my voice, tears streaming down my eyes, and a feeling of powerlessness all over my body. My heart hurt as if it had been cut, and I watched my loved one suffer, but I couldn't save him. The man turned his head to look at me wickedly, his expression disgusting. Don't worry, it's your turn. My arm was tugged at by one of his large, greasy hands, and the other hand was piercing my arm. When the needle was about to hit the skin, I heard the door bang and kick it open. Police! A hopeful voice came from outside, followed by gunshots and fights. The middle-aged man couldn't take care of me, and ran away from the window with the charming woman. Others fled. Soon, the police came into the house, untied Jonathan Paul and me, put us in a police car, and took us to the hospital. Jonathan Paul leaned against me, his body starting to get cold, his forehead hot, and he kept talking nonsense. I hugged him and called his name in my ear over and over again. He didn't respond, rested his head on my shoulder, and said to himself, Lauren Rusk, you owe me one more request. You say you're the most credible, right? Yes, yes. My tears kept flowing, dripping down his hands. He held my hand. Don't wait for me. Find a good man to marry. I am not blessed. After saying that, his head sank. He was unconscious. I had a sore nose and hugged him tightly, when suddenly I felt something hit my stomach, and I touched it, and it was Jonathan Paul's pocket with a square thing protruding. I took it out, and it was a small box, and when I opened it, there was a diamond ring inside, and on the inside of the shank was my name and his, and the time we first met when we were younger. My heart felt like something was gagging me, and tears flowed down my cheeks uncontrollably. I took out the ring, slipped it into the tip of Jonathan Paul's finger, and then reached the ring finger of my left hand, and little by little, the ring was placed on my hand. I leaned into his ear and whispered, I do. In the hospital, Jonathan Paul was wheeled into the emergency room while I waited anxiously outside. A few hours passed, and the doctor came out, took off his mask, and shook his head with an exhausted expression. My legs suddenly went limp, and I fell to the ground. The doctor opened his mouth. The person has been saved. The drug injected into the body is not well developed, and it will not become addictive, but the dose is too large, and the nerves in his brain are damaged, resulting in permanent amnesia. Is Jonathan Paul still alive? It's good to be alive. I stood up against the wall like a chicken, and rushed to the door to take the pushbed from the nurse. Jonathan Paul, don't think you want to use amnesia to pay off your debts. You bought the ring, and you put it on me. Don't try to escape. I will rely on you for the rest of my life. Jonathan Paul was lying on the hospital bed, his face pale, but he seemed to hear what I said, and his eyes rolled under his eyelids. HMPH. If only you heard me. As I spoke, my tears flowed, and I quickly wiped them, afraid that the tears would fall on him and affect his rest. 3 days later, Jonathan Paul woke up and, unsurprisingly, he didn't know me anymore. He looked at me with a strange look in his eyes, and politely asked me who I was. I thought about it for a moment and smiled and responded, I'm your good friend, very good friend. Then I put my hands behind my back, took off the ring on my ring finger, and put it in my pocket. At this moment I regretted it. This may be his chance to be reborn. He has the right to choose everything again. I should not selfishly bind him. He thanked me very politely, and I sent him home after I completed the discharge procedures. I was about to leave when a lot of people came to the police station to visit Jonathan Paul, who had been discharged from the hospital, and brought him his police uniform. His undercover work was very successful, and the drug lords who escaped that day were successfully arrested. His superiors approved his reinstatement and promoted him to deputy detachment. I watched him look happy, surrounded by everyone, smiled with satisfaction, and turned to leave silently. Walking out of the unit door, I heard my name called from behind me, and I looked back to see that it was an old policeman, who said his name was Ken Malin. Jonathan Paul mentioned him, and it was his master. "What are you going to do in the future?" He asked a question without a beginning or an end, and I didn't know how to answer. He then said, "Jonathan Paul doesn't remember you. Aren't you going to tell him?" I smiled lightly. "If you don't tell him, he should have a better life." "How do you know he shouldn't have you in the life he wants?" "What do you mean?" I asked him why he wanted to be a police officer, and he said that because of a girl named Lauren Rusk. She was very good, and her dream was to be a police officer and punish rape and evil, but he himself is a gangster who does not know how to learn, and in order to get closer to her, he began to pick up books, go to the police academy, and become a police officer, just hoping that she will like him more when he sees her again. He paused for a moment. "You are his light, and if you leave like this, his life will never shine again." I cried, ran back to Jonathan Paul's house like crazy, rushed through the crowd and hugged him tightly. Even though he looked at me with a puzzled expression, I didn't let go. After a long time, I took my hand off his neck, reached into my pocket, took out the ring, and placed it on his hand. "Jonathan Paul, we're not good friends. I'm your fiancé. I don't want to let you go. Let's get married." "Okay, I'm going to make you fall in love with me all over again." Ends. Extra. A year later, my grandmother's health is getting better day by day, and I no longer rely on protection money to get by. So I opened my first martial arts gym in the area. Business is very good, and life is very comfortable. On this day, Jonathan Paul and I had our wedding, in the presence of family and friends. In the evening, we lay in bed exhausted after taking a shower. He suddenly leaned over and restrained me between the bed and his firm chest. She lowered her lip and tapped softly on my forehead, then looked at me with a burning gaze. "Lauren Rusk, I miss you so much." He seemed to be different today. He had been very polite to me since he had lost his memory, and I knew very well that he was willing to marry me mostly because I was so good to him. It's been a year and a half, and he has never kissed me. At most he can't escape my entanglement, and gently kisses me on the forehead. I thought it would be the same today, so I gently raised my lips and smiled. "I've worked hard for you today, so let's rest early." He paused for a moment, kissed me on the lips domineeringly, and then lifted up. "Don't you want me? Think, why don't you want to? The man I love miserably is right in front of me, but I don't dare to say how much I love him, just because I'm afraid that he will be more disgusted with my existence if I say too much." Seeing that I didn't speak, he kissed me again, and forcibly pried my lips and teeth open with his warm tongue, touching the tip of my tongue, and I tasted the faint aroma of tobacco in his mouth. I looked at him in amazement. "I want to." He moved the kiss to my ear, and his voice was very charming. I didn't resist and let him strip my clothes one by one. I looked at his handsome face, his eyes full of love and pity, like Jonathan Paul before his amnesia. But the doctor clearly said that he had permanent amnesia. I jerked up and opened the drawer, and my journal was gone. "Jonathan Paul, have you seen my journal?" I was a little flustered. He came over and hugged me, rubbing my hair. "Lauren Rusk, will I love you in the future?" The end.